Thanks, Wendy. Let's start with what I call a tale of two paradigms. On one side, you have people where process is everything. Everything is focused around order or discipline, process and security and so on. You've seen the types. And then there's the people that say, let's get out of the way. Let them do their thing. They focus on freedom and creativity, engagement and flexibility. And as we go on, and somehow it went back to this other slide. Okay, here we are. I often ask people which side you're on, and usually, some people might be a little bit of a blend, but usually somebody tends to be more process-oriented, somebody tends to be more engagement-oriented. In fact, it's a good idea to have both represented on any team. But I always ask, are you sure, whichever side they choose? Whenever I do this as a workshop, and sometimes I'll throw out ideas like, building an airplane or leading a sports team or creating a film. Then I always throw people off with manufacturing widgets. Well, that has to be process, but it isn't. All of these things, innovation is another thing that throws people off. Well, that has to be engagement. All of these things require both. So it's a matter of rewiring our brain and taking a new approach to problems and being able to integrate and work in the gray and not take one side, another side, but be able to integrate both sides of things. Winston Churchill said, true genius resides in the capacity for evaluation of uncertain, hazardous, and conflicting information. And that's what this is all about, to be able to navigate those waters. So we're going to take a look at 7 common gray areas that most leaders face at some point. And by the way, the presentation is based on a book that I had written called Managing the Gray Areas, ironically enough. And that came out of a workshop that I had done with another consultant named, at the workshop, we had people from all walks of life, from manufacturing and healthcare and criminal intelligence. And, we kept coming up with advice in the workshop, talking about principles and process and people. I think it was like the 4 Ps. I forget what the fourth P was. But at any rate, as we went through the workshop, we had a flip chart where we kept track of certain things that maybe applied to one of the organizations, but other ones said, that didn't apply there. And we came up with a list of gray areas. So as soon as I saw that list by the end of the workshop, I knew that had to be my next book, because these were all gray areas that people were always confused about. Okay, so the first gray area is individual needs versus organizational goals. So you can process and talk about, you'll see a lot of advice talking about, okay, how to meet the organizational goals, or you'll see advice talking about, okay, how do you meet people's needs? Well, what about when things are sort of on that gray area where it's challenging both? So how can I be sympathetic to my people's needs in the face of organizational pressures? We'll take a look at a quick case study here. By the way, this guy looks exactly like my wife's cousin. So I actually had when I saw this picture, I had to call him. I said, did you pose for a picture, by the way? And he said, no. At any rate, Bob is frustrated with his job. He's tired of technical work. He wants to move into management for more pay. He's a great technician, but he lacks people skills. Let's say he wants to go into customer service or whatever. He's a great technician, but he lacks people skills. And let's say, to complicate things a little more, he's supporting a sick mother at home. So he's trying to get more pay, wants to move into management. Well, you're trying to you're trying to help the guy. He's a very good technician. He's good at what he does, but he doesn't like what he does. And I've seen that a lot. I've seen people that are really good at something, but they just want to do something different. And you want to be able to support your people, but on the other hand, you want to be able to have the organization have the people working at their most productive. So there are 3 classic schools of ethics. One is virtue ethics. It looks at character, and that says, what do I stand for and what values drive me? And you can make your decision based on what I stand for and things like that. Another school of thought is consequential aesthetics, and that looks at outcomes. It looks at, regardless of anything or how I feel or what anybody says, what's the consequences? What would the outcome be for the many and the few and their needs? And then the third school of thought looks at principled ethics and looks at standards, like what is right, what am I obligated to do? And I propose an integrated approach that we can call holistic ethics that looks at all 3, and you examine all 3 aspects of it to be able to make a more integrated decision. But there's some more questions to ask when you say, okay, what's right? Right according to whom? Am I obligated to my people, my organization, or both equally? And then if both equally, how do you make those decisions? What if satisfying one causes damage to the other? Can I rely on my values to split the difference? Are my values in line with my organization's values? And I highlighted this in red because I think this is most important of all. What pragmatic solution can I live with? Because at the end of the day, that's the question you have to ask, is what pragmatic solution can I live with? And what else do I have to ask? What else am I missing? What you want to avoid here with any of this is just jumping to conclusions. And if that sounds familiar, for those who saw Office Space, one of the office workers said, I once had a brilliant idea. It was called a jump to conclusions mat. You see, it'd be this mat that you could put on the floor, and it would have different conclusions written on it, and you could jump to. Well, not only is that a horrible idea, but jumping to conclusions is a horrible approach. So you want to avoid that. A more realistic example, and we're going to see a number of these examples throughout this session. A more realistic example, the boss wants you to give Pam a low score on her performance evaluation because each department has a certain number of low scores as part of an annual ranking system. So they have to have a certain number of low scores. Now, you don't feel this is fair because Pam just moved into the department and she's learning a new role. Plus, she's making great progress with it. So the last thing you want to do is to discourage her by giving her a low ranking in that. And this is a realistic situation that happens in a lot of organizations. In fact, it happened to me a number of years ago. I was a manager, and I was asked to give two of the people in my department a low score because there was a quota. There had to be a certain number of low scores in each group. And I thought that was the most ridiculous thing. I resisted it, and then finally the guy I was reporting to said, well, if you don't do it, I'm going to have to do it. So I thought about what to do and thought about all these examples. So if we look at these questions, is the ranking system fair? No, of course it's not. What options do you have? What variables? So what I ended up doing is I did end up giving the two people a lower score, but I gave them a glowing review. And then for good or bad, I knew them both fairly well, and I suggested that if they don't feel that the low score matches the good review, I kind of diplomatically suggested they might want to take it up with HR. They did, and then they got their score raised by going to HR. And, of course, HR called me, and as I knew they would, and they said, next time, if you're going to give somebody a glowing review, don't give them a low score or vice versa. I said, thanks for the tip. I'll keep that in mind. But in the meantime, I got everything done that I needed to get done. Could I live with that decision? Absolutely. Did I hurt the company? No. I helped them. They were just too stupid to realize it. So at any rate, that's a perfect example of something. Sometimes you have to get creative to be able to solve a problem and meet both people's needs. And again, it's not always black and white. Sometimes there's no right answer. Sometimes both answers are wrong. You have to pick one, and then you have to look at the situation and say, what can I live with, looking at all the aspects of it. The second gray area is generalists versus specialists. There are people that sometimes will say, okay, I want to have generalists, people that can do a little bit of everything, or we need specialists. Or there's an organization, IDEO, award-winning design firm. They said they like T-shaped people that were generalists in several areas, but then maybe specialists in a single area. They call that T-shaped people. So the question here, is it best to assemble a team of targeted specialists, or should I look for people that can do a little of everything? Now let's take a look at both. Generalists, they tend to excel via broad exposure. They can make inclusive diagnosis looking at a problem. Whereas specialists, they excel via repetition and focus, and implementation expertise seems to be their bag. So it's just the repeating everything they do and the focus, and they just get better and better. Generalists often make good leadership candidates, not solely by virtue of being a generalist, but because they're well-versed in a variety of areas. A lot of times they're sought out for leadership. Specialists, that's not to say a specialist can't make a great leader. They can, because leadership is its own capability. But what you don't want to do is promote a specialist, and I see it all the time, solely based on their specialty expertise. It's like going to an orchestra and saying, this guy's so good at first violin, let's make him conductor. It's two different skills. Generalists, you can't afford to dive